People always assume that when a marriage starts breaking, both people are equally guilty. That it's some slow mutual drift. That love just fades quietly. That's not true. Sometimes, one person makes a series of selfish, deliberate choices, and the other has no idea their entire life is about to be destroyed. I'm Marta Dexter. I was married to Will for 22 years. And I'm the one who ruined everything. I didn't wake up one day wanting to cheat. I didn't plan to betray my husband. It started the way these things usually do, with boredom I refused to admit and entitlement I didn't deserve. Will was solid, reliable, predictable, an engineer who saw the world in systems and logic. He loved me in quiet ways, fixing things before they broke, remembering details I forgot I'd shared, building a life that didn't sparkle but never collapsed. And I hated him for that. Somewhere along the way, stability began to feel like suffocation. I convinced myself I had sacrificed passion for security, that I had settled, that I deserved more than a man who came home tired and fell asleep watching documentaries. That's the lie I told myself. Jake came into my life when I was most vulnerable to believing it. He wasn't subtle. He wasn't deep. But he was attentive in a way that felt intoxicating. Compliments flowed easily from him. He noticed my clothes, my hair, my mood. He made me feel seen, or at least he made me feel admired. And admiration can be more addictive than love. At first, it was harmless. Messages during work hours. Inside jokes. Long lunches that blurred professional boundaries. I told myself Will didn't need to know because nothing physical had happened. Yet, when Jake suggested a trip, framed as a work thing with plausible excuses, I didn't hesitate as much as I should have. I told Will I was going to Chicago. I even rehearsed the lie until it sounded natural. He kissed my cheek that morning, told me to text if I needed anything, trusted me without question. That trust should have stopped me. It didn't. I wasn't thinking about my husband or my children when I walked into that hotel room. I was thinking about myself, about how alive I felt when I wasn't being responsible. But there's a difference between secrecy and stupidity. The longer the affair continued, the sloppier I became. I stopped guarding my phone carefully. I let confidence replace caution. I assumed Will was too gentle, too predictable, to ever suspect me. That was my second mistake. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I made Will coffee. That alone should have raised suspicion. I hadn't done that in years. But that morning I needed something to go right. Something controlled. Something I could manage. The plan wasn't supposed to involve harm, not in the way people imagine when they hear the truth later. It was supposed to be temporary. Enough to create concern. Enough to give Jake time. I told myself that. I didn't account for Victoria. My sister has always been careless. Entitled. The kind of person who assumes the world exists for her convenience. When she grabbed the wrong mug and drank the coffee meant for Will, my stomach dropped instantly. The consequences were immediate and humiliating. Watching her suffer should have horrified me. Instead, all I felt was panic. Because the wrong person had taken the hit, and now everything felt unstable. Will noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. That night, when he asked about the coffee, I lied without hesitation. I deflected, minimized, questioned his sanity. Gaslighting came more naturally than I expected, as if I'd been practicing for years. But something in his eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It was awareness. I realized too late that engineers don't ignore patterns. When I left for what I claimed was a business trip, I thought distance would protect me. I didn't know he was already several steps ahead. Jake and I laughed that night at the hotel. Drank too much. Forgot ourselves. I felt untouchable, like consequences were for other people. Then Will appeared in the parking lot. I still remember the sound of my heart collapsing into my chest. The confrontation was short, brutal, efficient. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He looked at us the way someone looks at a faulty structure, something beyond saving. That scared me more than rage ever could. From that moment on, nothing I did mattered. He knew. And Will, once he knows something, doesn't let it go. What followed didn't feel like revenge at first. It felt like exposure. like watching the carefully curated version of myself unravel in public. My affair wasn't just discovered, it was documented. Screenshots, locations, timelines, things I hadn't even thought to hide. Jake panicked. I tried to regain control, but control had already slipped through my fingers. My children started pulling away. Quietly, observantly. They didn't need explanations. They could sense dishonesty like a smell in the room. And Will became someone I didn't recognize. Not violent, not cruel, calculated. He wasn't trying to hurt me emotionally. He was dismantling the life I'd taken for granted. I tried to frame myself as a victim. I told myself he was overreacting, that we could talk, that therapy could fix this. But deep down, I knew something irreversible had begun. Because when a man who has loved you for decades stops arguing, stops begging, stops asking why, it's already over. I didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. I only knew that the story I'd been telling myself, about freedom, about passion, about deserving more, was collapsing under the weight of consequences I could no longer outrun. And this was only the beginning. After that night at the hotel, nothing felt real anymore. I kept waiting for Will to call, to shout, to demand explanations, to threaten me with divorce or custody battles. That's what people do when they're hurt, right? But Will didn't do any of that. He went quiet. At first, I thought silence meant denial. I convinced myself he was processing, maybe even blaming himself. That gave me a false sense of relief. I told Jake we just needed to lay low for a while, that eventually Will would calm down, and I could control the narrative. I underestimated how dangerous calm can be. When I came home, the house felt different. Everything was in its place, but the air was wrong. Will moved through rooms like a stranger who knew exactly where everything belonged but didn't care anymore. He didn't sleep in our bed. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't even look at my phone, which I left face up on purpose, hoping he'd accuse me of something so I could defend myself. Instead, he observed. That scared me more than any confrontation. Jake was unraveling. He kept calling, texting, panicking. His confidence vanished the moment he realized Will wasn't reacting emotionally. Jake needed chaos. He thrived on drama. Will was giving him the opposite. And that made Jake sloppy. Things started leaking into places they shouldn't have. My sister stopped answering my calls. My boss suddenly avoided eye contact at work. Colleagues who used to invite me for lunch now found excuses to stay busy. I told myself it was coincidence. But deep down, I felt something tightening around my life. Invisible, methodical, inescapable. Then the first real blow landed. I woke up one morning to dozens of missed calls and messages. Group chats exploding. Notifications from people I hadn't spoken to in years. When I finally opened my phone, my stomach dropped. Victoria's humiliation was everywhere. Clips, screenshots, commentary. Something deeply private had been turned into entertainment, and it was spreading faster than I could process. Family members were arguing publicly. Friends were choosing sides. And somehow, my name was being whispered behind every message. I confronted Will that night. Not angrily, desperately. I told him we needed to talk like adults. That whatever mistakes I'd made didn't justify public destruction. That we had children. He listened. He always listened. But when he finally spoke, it was clear he wasn't negotiating. He told me calmly that he was protecting what mattered to him, that I had made choices, and now he was making his own. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult me. He simply stated facts. And facts coming from someone like Will felt final. Jake tried to fight back. He thought exposure could be countered with intimidation. He thought he could scare Will into backing down. That was his biggest mistake. I started seeing Jake for who he really was, reactive, impulsive, reckless. The man who had once made me feel powerful now felt like a liability attached to my neck, dragging me deeper. Every move he made only worsened the situation. More attention, more humiliation, more eyes watching. Meanwhile, Will became untouchable. He documented everything. Every interaction. Every attempt Jake made to provoke him. Every reaction I had. I could feel myself being cataloged, reduced to evidence. My children stopped talking to me. Not dramatically. Not with shouting or accusations. They simply withdrew. My daughter looked at me like I was someone she used to know. My son spoke to me only when necessary, his tone flat and distant. That hurt more than losing Will ever could. I tried to justify myself to them. Tried to explain that adults make mistakes. That relationships are complicated. That I was unhappy. They didn't argue. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. I began to realize something horrifying. I hadn't just betrayed my husband. I had destabilized my entire family. Work became unbearable. Whispers followed me through hallways. Meetings felt colder. My boss stopped defending me. The protection I thought I had vanished overnight. One afternoon, I was called into an office I'd never been summoned to before. The conversation was short, professional, brutal. My position was being reevaluated. My responsibilities reduced. My future uncertain. I knew why. And I knew who was responsible. Will never showed his hand directly, but I could see his fingerprints everywhere. Systems breaking. Doors closing. Opportunities evaporating. Not through aggression. Through precision. Jake tried to confront Will publicly. It ended badly. Videos circulated. Laughter followed. Sympathy disappeared. Association with Jake became toxic. And yet, I couldn't detach from him. Because admitting Jake was a mistake meant admitting everything was. Then came the night I tried to take control again. I thought if I could at least keep my daughter with me, I'd have leverage. Emotional leverage. Something would hesitate to fight. I was wrong. Standing in the driveway, seeing my daughter choose him without hesitation, something inside me broke completely. Not anger. Realization. I wasn't losing them because Will was manipulative. I was losing them because they no longer trusted me. From that moment on, things accelerated beyond anything I could stop. Legal paperwork appeared without warning. Assets I assumed were shared were suddenly unreachable. Accounts frozen. Access restricted. Decisions already made. I consulted a lawyer too late. By the time I understood what was happening, I was reacting instead of acting. Always one step behind. Always scrambling. Will wasn't punishing me. He was removing me from the center of his life. And that felt worse. Jake spiraled. He grew desperate. Angry. Reckless. His attempts to reclaim control turned violent, public, humiliating. Every time he lashed out, Will gained more ground. And every time I defended Jake, I lost another piece of credibility. Friends stopped answering. Family stopped inviting. Even people who once supported me began distancing themselves. I became the common denominator in every disaster. The night everything truly collapsed came during a storm. Jake and I had nothing left, no jobs, no allies, no plan. Desperation made us stupid. We showed up at Will's house thinking confrontation was our last option. It was our final mistake. That night stripped away any illusion I still had about myself. Standing soaked in rain, exposed in front of neighbors, cameras, police, I saw my life the way everyone else now did. Not tragic. Not misunderstood. Just consequences unfolding. When my daughter spoke that night, when she said she no longer saw me as her mother, something inside me died quietly. No scream. No breakdown. Just emptiness. Jake was taken away. I was left standing there with nothing. No family. No future. No narrative that could save me. As I walked away from the house I once called home, I finally understood the truth I'd avoided from the beginning. I hadn't been trapped in my marriage. I had been protected by it. And I threw that protection away for attention that vanished the moment things got real. What I didn't know yet was that the worst part wasn't losing everything. The worst part was what came after, living with it. After that night, there was nothing left to fight for. The house I once called home was no longer mine. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not in any way that mattered. I moved between temporary places like a ghost, a spare room at a cousin's house, then a short-term rental I could barely afford, Then finally a small apartment that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and loneliness. Silence followed me everywhere. No one called to check on me. No one asked how I was coping. The same people who once envied my life now avoided my name altogether. I became a lesson, a warning, something whispered about rather than spoken to directly. Jake disappeared quickly. Not in a dramatic way. Not with apologies or explanations. One day, he simply stopped answering. His problems had grown larger than me. Legal trouble, financial collapse, reputation destroyed beyond repair. The man I had risked everything for didn't have the capacity to stand beside me once consequences arrived. I wasn't surprised. I was embarrassed that I ever thought I would be. The divorce papers arrived without ceremony. No dramatic confrontations. No emotional pleas. Just documents, precise, thorough, airtight. Will had prepared long before I realized what was happening. Every asset accounted for. Every responsibility defined. Every weakness anticipated. I read through the pages slowly, hoping to find something unfair, something to argue against. There was nothing. Legally, he had done everything right. Morally, too. The house was protected for the kids. The savings were placed where I couldn't touch them. My access was limited to what the court deemed reasonable. I signed. Not because I agreed, but because I had no strength left to pretend I was wronged. The day the divorce was finalized, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like erasure. 22 years of marriage reduced to paperwork and quiet nods. No tears from Will. No accusations. He didn't even look relieved. He looked finished. That was harder to bear than hatred. I tried reaching out to my children afterward. Carefully. Respectfully. Through messages that didn't ask for forgiveness outright but hinted at regret. They didn't respond. Not immediately. When my daughter finally did, weeks later, her words were polite and distant. She said she needed time. That she wasn't ready. That she hoped I understood. I told her I did. I didn't tell her how empty my days had become. I didn't tell her that I replayed ordinary moments in my head, family dinners, quiet mornings, small arguments that now felt precious. I didn't tell her that the memories hurt more than the silence. I found a job eventually. Not the kind I once had. Not the kind that impressed anyone. Just something stable enough to survive. Every interview felt like an exercise in humility. Every paycheck reminded me of how much I'd lost. At night, I lay awake thinking about how carefully I had dismantled my own life while convincing myself I was chasing happiness. I thought about Will. Not the man he became at the end, but the man he had always been. Patient. Loyal. Present. A man who loved in ways I only appreciated once they were gone. I thought about how easily I dismissed that love. How easily I believed I deserved more without ever questioning what I was already given. There were moments, quiet, humiliating moments, when I almost admired the way Will handled everything. Not with cruelty. Not with chaos. With boundaries. He didn't destroy me. He stepped away and let my choices do that on their own. That realization was the hardest to accept. I wanted someone to blame. I wanted to tell myself that if Will had been different, if he had been more passionate, more exciting, more attentive, none of this would have happened. But that lie didn't survive reality. He had been enough. I hadn't been honest. The loneliness didn't come all at once. It arrived gradually, settling into routines. Empty weekends. Meals eaten alone. No one to share good news with. No one to argue with. No one who truly knew me anymore. And worst of all, no one who needed me. The freedom I once craved felt meaningless without connection. Without trust. Without a family that believed in me. Some nights, I wondered if things could have ended differently if I had stopped earlier. If I had confessed. If I had chosen discomfort over betrayal. But regrets don't change outcomes. They only teach lessons too late. I heard through others that Will was doing well. That the kids were thriving. That the house felt peaceful again. That stability had returned. That knowledge hurt. But it also brought clarity. They didn't need me to heal. They needed distance for me to do it. So this is where my story ends. Not with redemption. Not with forgiveness. Just understanding. I wasn't a victim of a failed marriage. I was the cause of its collapse. I traded loyalty for excitement, stability for ego, and love for validation. And when the illusion faded, all that remained were consequences I had no one to share with. If there's one truth I've learned, it's this. You don't lose everything the moment you cheat. You lose it slowly, piece by piece, until one day you look around and realize there's nothing left worth fighting for. And by then, it's already too late.